The phone rang in the small home of an elderly woman just after midday, its shrilled tone echoing through the quiet rooms where the only sound had been the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, and she reached for it with the same mixture of habit and mild dread that every unexpected call brings, pressing the receiver to her ear and answering in a polite but cautious voice, not realizing that in the next moments she was about to be pulled into a carefully crafted lie. One that would strip away her certainty and replace it with fear, urgency, and the dangerous belief that she was helping protect her savings. On the other end of the line came a male voice, professional and calm, claiming to be from her bank, and he addressed her by name, which startled her and immediately lent his words a chilling authenticity. For how could a stranger know who she was unless it was truly her bank calling? He spoke of suspicious activity on her account, of dangerous transactions traced to overseas hackers, and he told her that unless she acted quickly, thousands of dollars could vanish. She sat upright in her armchair, the words cutting through her like ice, and the world around her seemed to still as she tried to comprehend what she was hearing. He told her the bank was working with the police, that she was not to mention this to anyone else because ongoing investigations were sensitive, and he explained that the safest way to secure her funds was to temporarily convert them into prepaid gift cards that would be flagged and then refunded back into her account once the threat was neutralized. The explanation was confusing, but he spoke with such confidence, layering in technical terms she did not understand, that it seemed beyond her ability to question. She thought of her modest savings, the nest egg she depended upon in retirement, and her chest tightened with anxiety. To her, the voice on the phone carried authority, and authority demanded trust. He instructed her to stay calm and cooperate. She hesitated, murmuring that she had never heard of such a process, but he cut in smoothly, reassuring her that this was an emergency protocol, and many customers had been helped in exactly this way, that she was not alone, that she had been lucky to receive the call before the hackers drained her account completely. Each sentence was designed to suppress doubt and replace it with dependence. Within minutes, he had convinced her to prepare herself to leave the house, to go to her local shopping center and purchase the first set of cards, and he promised to guide her every step of the way. She slipped on her shoes, grabbed her handbag, and stepped outside into the bright but chilly afternoon, holding the phone to her ear as the scammer's instructions continued. He told her to order a taxi immediately and not to waste time. Her heart raced as she dialed, still listening to the man who kept urging her not to hang up. When the cab arrived, she climbed in, fumbling with the seatbelt as the driver asked her destination, and she gave the name of the shopping center in a strained voice. The driver did not notice her shaking hands, her distracted nods, or the way she pressed the phone close against her ear, whispering yes and okay as the scammer laid out the next steps. The ride seemed both fast and unbearably long, the familiar streets outside the window now distorted by the knowledge that her money was at risk and only this stranger's guidance could save it. She imagined faceless criminals waiting to pounce on her bank account, digits vanishing from her balance, and she clung to the voice on the line as her lifeline. When the taxi dropped her at the supermarket entrance, she stood for a moment with the phone still glued to her ear, staring at the automatic doors that opened and closed as shoppers streamed in and out with trolleys clattering against the tiled floor. The scammer reminded her firmly, "Do not tell anyone what you're doing. This is classified. If you speak up, you could compromise the investigation." She nodded, whispering that she understood, though no one around her knew to whom she spoke. Inside the supermarket, the bright fluorescent lights and the smell of fresh bread baking in the corner bakery section did nothing to calm her. She moved stiffly through the aisles, heading toward the racks of gift cards that hung in neat rows of color: iTunes, Google Play, Apple, Amazon, an entire wall of plastic rectangles that suddenly held the imagined power of safety. The scammer's voice urged her to take specific ones, high-value denominations, and she obeyed, her hands trembling as she plucked them from the hooks. She could feel other shoppers moving around her, oblivious to the private storm unfolding in her mind, and she prayed that no one would ask her why she needed so many cards. At the self-checkout, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the screen, and a store attendant drifted nearby, offering help with a polite smile. She forced herself to smile back and shook her head, murmuring that she was fine.
She scanned the first few cards, listening to the voice in her ear telling her she was doing well, that the process was almost complete. But the machine beeped, a warning tone that drew attention, and the attendant returned, frowning slightly as she glanced at the growing pile of gift cards. The elderly woman froze, sweat prickling at the back of her neck, remembering the stern warning not to reveal the truth, fearing that speaking would somehow ruin the secret investigation. But the attendant had seen this pattern before: nervous customers, stacks of gift cards, phones clutched tightly to ears, and she gently asked if someone was on the phone with her right now. She stammered, denying it, shifting awkwardly, trying to shield the receiver from view. But the attendant's voice was calm and insistent. She explained that scammers often target people with this very trick, pretending to be from a bank or government office. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears as panic surged through her. She did not know whom to believe: the stranger who had convinced her of looming disaster, or this kind stranger warning her that she was being manipulated. The scammer's voice grew harsher in her ear, urging her to not listen, demanding that she finish scanning, warning that every second wasted risked her account being drained. The attendant, sensing the urgency in her distress, asked her to please hang up the call. For the first time since the nightmare had begun, the woman's grip loosened on the phone, her hand shaking as she pulled it from her ear. She stared at the dark screen after pressing the red button, and silence flooded her world again. The relief was instantaneous yet incomplete, for it was mixed with shame, confusion, and the horrifying realization that she had come perilously close to losing everything. Her heart was hammering as the line went dead, the phone limp in her hand, and for the first time since the call had begun, she realized how trapped she had been in the sound of that man's voice, how much power he had wielded simply by speaking with confidence, and how frighteningly easy it had been for him to slip past her defenses. The supermarket seemed to close in around her, as if the walls were pressing tighter, the hum of fluorescent lights louder, every shopper's glance a reminder of her humiliation. The attendant touched her arm gently, guiding her away from the self-checkout, asking if she was all right, if she needed someone to call a family member. The woman nodded weakly, her eyes shining with tears she was too ashamed to let fall, and she whispered that she thought she had almost lost everything. The attendant reassured her that she had done nothing wrong, that these criminals were skilled manipulators who preyed on people's trust, but the words did little to soothe the ache inside her. She had nearly handed over her savings to a phantom, and the knowledge gnawed at her with a bitterness that settled in her chest. Outside the supermarket, the late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the taxi driver who had brought her was waiting nearby, leaning on his car with a puzzled expression as if wondering why her passenger had taken so long. She climbed in slowly, clutching her handbag as though it contained something fragile, and when he asked if she was all right, she forced a smile and said yes, though her voice cracked. On the ride home, she stared out the window, the scenery sliding by unnoticed, replaying every word of the phone call in her mind. She remembered how calm he sounded, how knowledgeable, how quickly he dismissed her doubts, and she wondered why she hadn't seen through it. But deep down she knew the answer, because she wanted to protect her savings, because fear clouds judgment, because isolation makes the impossible seem plausible. At home, she sank into her armchair, the silence of the house pressing down on her. The hum of the refrigerator returned, the neighbor's dog barked again. The world unchanged, but she was changed. She picked up her phone and stared at the recent call log, the number unknown and impossible to trace, yet it still felt like a shadow hanging over her. She thought of calling her daughter, of confessing what had happened, but shame gripped her tongue. How could she admit that she had nearly been fooled so badly? How could she bear to see pity in her family's eyes? So she sat alone, her hands twisting in her lap, the memory of the scammer's voice still whispering that she had been lucky to escape this time but might not be so lucky again. In another part of the city, the scammer sat at a desk cluttered with burner phones, prepaid SIM cards, and scraps of paper covered in notes. He was not a lone wolf, but part of a network, his day filled with dozens of calls, some successful, others not, all of them a numbers game. He had learned to recognize the wavering tones of the vulnerable, the pauses that betrayed confusion, the eagerness to please authority. He had spoken to hundreds of people like her, and he knew that even if she had slipped from his grasp, another victim would answer the phone tomorrow, perhaps even tonight, and the cycle would continue. To him, she was not a person, but a potential payout, a string of digits that could have turned into codes that could have been sold on black markets within minutes, transformed into money that would vanish into anonymous wallets and never be recovered. Her fear had been his fuel. And though he failed, he felt no remorse, only irritation that the supermarket attendant had interfered. Tomorrow, he told himself, would bring better luck. Back in her home, the elderly woman decided at last to call her daughter. The conversation was halting at first, her words spilling out in fragments, her daughter's voice filling with alarm as she pieced together what had happened. There was anger, not at her but at the criminals, frustration that people could be so cruel, but above all, there was relief that she had not lost her savings. Her daughter insisted she contact the police and the bank, and though her hands shook as she dialed again, she obeyed, this time speaking to real officials, hearing the steadiness in their voices as they confirmed that she had indeed been targeted by a well-known scam. They told her she was not alone. The dozens of reports came in every week from people of all ages, but especially the elderly, because scammers knew they were more likely to trust a voice claiming to be from authority. The officers explained that while it was difficult to catch these criminals, awareness was the strongest defense, and by speaking up, she was helping others. For the first time that day, she felt a flicker of pride amidst her shame. The story spread quickly through her community. At church the following Sunday, she overheard whispers as friends recounted what had happened, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others admitting they too had received suspicious calls but had hung up. Her experience became both a cautionary tale and a point of connection. Proof that anyone could be caught off guard, that vigilance had to be constant. She spoke to a local journalist, her name withheld at her request, and her words appeared in print a few days later, describing how close she had come to disaster, how grateful she was for the stranger in the supermarket who had seen what she could not. Readers responded with sympathy, some sharing their own brushes with scams, others thanking her for her honesty. She had feared humiliation, but instead she found solidarity, the comfort of knowing she was not alone. The scammer, meanwhile, moved on to new numbers, new scripts, tweaking his approach based on what had failed. Sometimes he posed as a government official, sometimes as a police officer, sometimes as a tech support worker from a familiar company. Each persona was a mask, each victim a stage on which he played his role. His methods were refined, polished by repetition, and while some hung up immediately, others hesitated, and hesitation was all he needed. For every failed attempt, there was a success, and each success kept the network alive, feeding off the fear and trust of the unsuspecting. He didn't know nor care about the lives he disrupted, the sleepless nights he caused, the savings wiped away in seconds. To him, it was business. To his victims, it was betrayal. As weeks passed, the elderly woman began to regain her footing, but the shadow of the call lingered. She jumped whenever the phone rang, her breath catching until she saw the caller ID. She avoided answering numbers she did not recognize, and even when speaking to her bank, she questioned their identity repeatedly, unwilling to be fooled again. Her trust had been fractured, a small but profound loss that could never be fully restored. Yet she took solace in small victories. She had not handed over the gift card codes, she had hung up before it was too late, and she had reported the scam and perhaps prevented someone else from falling prey. She clung to those facts as a shield against the darker thought of what might have been.
The world outside moved on, but within her home she carried the memory like a scar. She had seen firsthand how easily confidence could be manufactured, how authority could be faked, and she resolved never to underestimate the power of a voice again. And though she could not erase the shame, she found strength in sharing her story, in turning her near loss into a warning. If even one person hung up on a scammer because of her, then perhaps some good had come from her ordeal. Weeks turned into months, and though the elderly woman's life appeared to return to normal, there were fractures invisible to anyone but her. The phone, once a tool of comfort and connection, had become a source of suspicion. Each ring carried a weight, each unknown number a test of nerves. She began to let calls go unanswered, waiting instead for voicemails that rarely came. Her daughter noticed the hesitation, the way her mother would glance at the handset with narrowed eyes, as though it were a coiled snake ready to strike. Trust, once so natural, now had to be earned with proof. Even the bank, when reaching out to her legitimately, was met with a wall of doubt, every word challenged, every pause examined. And though she knew this vigilance was rational, it exhausted her, draining her of a simplicity she once took for granted. But she was not entirely alone in her unease. Across the country, thousands of others were experiencing the same violation, their voices phoned hotlines and complaint centers, their losses running into millions. Some had been less fortunate than her, handing over their codes in a haze of fear, watching helplessly as their savings were siphoned away into invisible channels. For some, the loss was financial devastation. For others, it was the humiliation that cut deepest, the realization that they had been manipulated with words alone. Police reports piled up, investigators tracing threads that vanished into international networks, the perpetrators shielded by borders and technology. Governments issued warnings, consumer groups held campaigns, supermarkets posted signs by the gift card racks that read, "No government agency will ever ask for payment in gift cards." The message was clear, but still, the calls came, and still, people answered. The scammer who had nearly ensnared her was among them, his burner phones constantly buzzing, his scripts evolving with each new report. He had grown used to rejection, even to insults, but he also savored the moments when hesitation tipped into compliance. He knew the rhythms of fear, the way a voice would quicken when a victim began to believe. He prided himself on his ability to improvise, to pivot from one story to another with ease. If one mask slipped, he donned another. He was, in his own mind, an actor on a stage where the stakes were measured in dollars and despair. And while his victims struggled with shame, he slept soundly, telling himself that it was not personal, that they were just strangers whose numbers happened to cross his desk. Yet, not every scammer escaped scrutiny. Behind the scenes, law enforcement agencies collaborated across borders, tracing the flow of money, monitoring online marketplaces where stolen codes were sold at a fraction of their value. Cybercrime units pieced together fragments of data, linking phone numbers to servers, servers to locations, locations to networks that stretched like spiderwebs across continents. Every arrest was a small victory, every confiscated phone a glimpse into the machinery of deceit. But for every cell dismantled, another seemed to emerge, as if the scam industry were a hydra, its heads multiplying faster than they could be cut. For the elderly woman, life settled into a new rhythm. She joined a local community group focused on protecting seniors from fraud, attending meetings where stories were shared like battle scars. She listened to others describe their encounters, nodding as the details mirrored her own, the fake threats, the urgency, the manipulation. She spoke too, halting at first, but soon with conviction, her words carrying the weight of lived experience. In sharing her ordeal, she found purpose, transforming her fear into a weapon of awareness. She could not stop the scammers, but she could help others recognize the signs, could plant seeds of skepticism that might one day save someone else from loss. The journalist who had first interviewed her returned months later, writing a follow-up story that framed her not as a victim, but as a survivor, a voice in the fight against scams. The article painted her as an example of resilience, a woman who had nearly fallen, but had instead chosen to rise and warn others. She read it with a mixture of pride and discomfort, for the memory still stung, but she also knew the power of stories. If her shame could protect even one stranger, then perhaps it was worth bearing. Still, in the quiet of her home, when the phone rang unexpectedly and her heart raced,
She understood that some wounds never fully healed. The memory of that calm, authoritative voice would always linger, a reminder of how thin the line between safety and danger could be. She would always wonder how close she had come, how her life might have unraveled had she scratched those cards and read out the numbers. That single choice, made in a moment of hesitation, had saved her, and it haunted her with its fragility. It is easy to dismiss such stories as cautionary tales, to imagine that one would never fall for such a trick, that vigilance is enough. But in reality, scams thrive not because people are foolish, but because fear is universal, and trust is human. The woman's story is not an outlier, but a mirror, reflecting a vulnerability that exists in all of us. The scammers know this. They count on it. And as long as voices like theirs can reach into the sanctity of our homes, the battle will never truly end. Her ordeal did not conclude with tidy justice or neat closure. The scammer was never caught, the network never dismantled, the threat never extinguished. What she gained instead was a hard-earned awareness, a sharpened instinct, a story to pass on. And though the scars remained, so did her resilience. She had faced the abyss and stepped back, and in that small act of resistance lay a quiet triumph. The phone would ring again, countless times, for countless others, but for her, the voice on the line would never again hold the same power. Stories like this aren't rare. They're happening every single day, and anyone could be the next target. That's why protecting yourself online isn't just important, it's urgent. Always remember, no bank, no government agency, no legitimate business will ever ask you to pay with gift cards. If you've ever felt the pressure of a call like this, drop your experience in the comments section. If you want to dive deeper into real cases like this one and learn how to recognize the red flags before it's too late, make sure you subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next story might just save you or someone you love from becoming the next victim.